Alrighty, well, we're a minute or so early, so I won't go too much into it right now. Wait a couple more people come. You have packets. I cannot possibly go over all the interesting things about like 8 different faiths in 45 minutes. So you have packets that you can dig in as much as you want. Those are still very kind of 50,000 feet up overviews of some of these different faiths, but have some interesting little tidbits about them to kind of whet your appetite. Like, ooh, this one sounds interesting, I want to learn more. There's a lot of information out there. You can also reach out to me. I have different books and all that kind of stuff on different faiths in my office. So this will be more focused on just some of the holy sites went to, just some of the impressions of some of these different faiths in India. India is interesting because it's such a amalgamation of ancient faiths. You know, in America, all the faiths were pretty much brought over that exist for the most part now, except for those kind of spiritual beliefs of the indigenous peoples who were here first. But those aren't as mainstream. And we brought over Christianity and eventually Islam, Buddhism, and Jainism. All these faiths exist in America, Sikhism. But many of them were kind of founded on the Indian subcontinent. Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Hinduism, and Islam not very far away. So there's a lot there. Christianity's there too. I didn't put it on the list just because a lot of you know a lot about Christianity, and I didn't want to waste my time visiting a Christian church there, and there were so many other ones that I haven't been able to kind of see those spots of before. So we're going to start with Baha'i. Has anyone been to the Baha'i temple in Chicago? So Baha'i has like one major kind of temple place on each continent except Antarctica. They add like Oceania instead. And I really feel bad that in all my times I went to Chicago, I never actually went up to it because it's spectacular, it's beautiful. But we went to the one here in India. And it's the Lotus Temple. You can see it there. Its lotus flowers are big in India, a lot of symbolism. So it has kind of pools surrounding it. So there's one major temple on each continent. The lotus-shaped design reflects the conviction that a new and better world can flower out of even the most dire conditions. We'll talk about that a little bit today in the sermon, that joy can even come out of dire circumstances, that God can transform even the worst things into reasons for blessing. Now, the cross was a horrible thing. It's now become a symbol of hope. For centuries, it was a symbol of fear and torture. Now people wear it as a symbol of hope and love, transforming. So Baha'i kind of believes that. So since its inauguration in 1985, it's a newer temple, and after 10,000 people come to the temple. And I want you to keep quiet in there. It's pretty bare inside. Just kind of chairs lined up, not a lot of stained glass, not a lot of gold ornate things that you might see in many other kind of religious sites. It's just very open, modern, kind of plain, which can be nice. I don't know why that's blank. Baha'i quick facts. And you can also see some on your sheet. So the Baha'i faith was originated in Iran in 1844. So it's pretty new in the grand scheme of things. It was founded by Baha'u'llah, who believed he was the most recent in a line of messengers of God that includes Abraham, Moses, and Jesus Christ. So kind of Islam has, Muhammad being the next messenger. Baha'i has Baha'u'llah as the next messenger in the line after Muhammad. So in the main beliefs, Baha'i believe that God revealed God's self through a series of messengers, and that the world's major religions are all chapters in God's teachings. They also believe that humanity is one race, that the world should be unified into a global society. So all these other religions, all kind of equal, all different chapters in the same book that has the same real beginning and the same real ending. Baha'i kind of unites them all together. Principles include the equality of men and women, universal education, the elimination of prejudice, and extremes of wealth and poverty. So, you're going to see some of this kind of stuff in other religions. It's not anything crazy out there. You could go to a Baha'i temple and not feel completely out of place in what's kind of being said. Hey, we belong to each other. We should try to work for justice. We're all created equal. There's no longer male or female, slave or free, Jew or Greek. Some of the same stuff. Practices, Baha'i practice daily prayer and service. Sounds familiar. Their temples are open to all. Sounds familiar, but they can come to our church. They also observe 9 holy days in an annual fast. And technically, Lent would be a time of fasting. So again, a lot of actual similarities. The most holy text of the 5 faith is the Kitab Akbas, which contains the Baha'i laws. So, why doesn't that picture show up? I have trouble with these things sometimes when I try to put them in. So, after we went to the Lotus Temple, we went to this Hindu temple called the Swaminarayan Akshardam. It's called Akshardam for short. And you can't actually take pictures inside at all. So we bought a book that then take pictures of the book to put in our photo book. Now you look at it, you get there, and you think, this is like a really old temple. But you kind of look at it, it's supposed to look old, but it's actually pretty new. So it was opened in 2005. So it's a huge complex. It's the second largest Hindu temple in the world. It was the largest. The first biggest is now the Akshardam in New Jersey. So I actually hope to go over there and see that one sometime. It's not all that far away. Opened in 2005, over 8,000 volunteers from around the world contributed more than 300 million hours into the project. It's made of sandstone and marble. It's not supported at all by steel or concrete. So you go inside, and there's all these kinds of ornate kind of marble carvings, and it kind of tells the life of this one particular guru. See, this one picture shows up of all of these. So those are the elephants. And so around the outside, they have these carvings of elephants. And they also have these stories involving elephants. There's some elephants that have multiple tusks, creation of the world. So there's all these kind of elephant stories throughout there.
Yoga,
No,
karma,
I don't want to do that yet. Stop.
Namaste.
Stop. We'll get there. We'll watch a short thing on Hinduism. See, this shows up, but the pictures don't. I don't get it. So, the Akshardam kind of tells the life of this kind of one guru, this kind of boy who exhibited kind of early gifts of wisdom and sageness. And then you have these different shrines, the different avatars of the deities. Hinduism gets kind of complicated, and you have all these kind of people like Ramayana and Ani and Ganesh and all these things that are like avatars. Different humans at times have become kind of avatars, vessels of these main gods. But you have them pictured, they each have a spouse, there's Lakshmi and all these other ones. But it's beautiful inside. They're there to go to any of the Hindu temples. You take off your shoes, you leave them. No one steals shoes, which is nice. Some places they have like a attendant, other places you just leave them. Same thing with the Islamic mosques. Pretty much any of the holy sites, Baha'i, you take off your shoes before entering. So we'll watch a very short video on kind of just the very basics of Hinduism.
Yoga, karma, dharma, om, namaste. All words you've probably heard, but how much do you know about their root? Hinduism. Hinduism embraces a diversity of teachings and practices. Unifying them is the knowledge that all of creation is divine. Hindus believe that the divine exists everywhere and in everything, plants, animals, and people. We view the oceans and mountains, wind and rain, sun, moon, and planets as divine. Hindus worship the divine in male and female forms, animal forms, and sometimes with no form at all. Hinduism is pluralistic, which means we know there is more than one way to know and experience the divine. Hindus know there is more to you than just your body and mind. The Atman or soul is a spark of God or the divine, which exists in all beings. The idea of karma comes from Hinduism. Your every thought and action has a reaction. Good thoughts and good deeds lead to positive outcomes. Bad ones lead to bad outcomes. Today, Hinduism is practiced by 8 billion people worldwide. It is inclusive and welcoming of diversity and sees the whole world as one big family. To learn more, visit.
There you go. Hinduism is actually, in this picture will show up, actually probably the oldest of the major world religions. Older than Christianity, older than Judaism. It's the third largest after Christianity and Islam. So Hinduism is a faith, but it's also talked about as a way of life, which really most faiths should be. You would hope people talk about Christianity as both a faith and a way of life. Sadly, though, you don't often. When we get to Buddhism, Buddhism technically isn't a religion. It's a philosophy, way of life. So there are Hindu Buddhists, there are Christian Buddhists, that you can practice the Buddhist way of life while believing and following a certain faith and believing in different deities. So Hinduism is pluralistic, has multiple gods and multiple forms at different times. You'll see different temples kind of dedicated to these different versions of the different deities. And then like in Nepal, which you'll see later, you have Hindu Buddhist shrines kind of together, morphed into one. Some of the strict Buddhists never really liked that because as Hindus kind of moved into the area and Buddhism kind of spread, eventually they kind of got joined together in a lot of ways. So it's almost inseparable at this point in a lot of the places. So Hinduism, again, it's a religion, it's a way of life. There are also many in India who'd say they're Hindu, but they aren't really practicing Hindus in the sense of the faith. It's kind of like you have people who will say they are Jews, but they don't really go to synagogue. They don't practice either the Orthodox faith or the conservative or the progressive or any of those. They just identify as a Jew. There are those who identify as Hindu who don't really practice all of us Hinduism, or they'll go sometimes and do it. Our guide on the trip talked about being a Hindu, but never really practicing the faith. But then there's this one temple at this national park, Ranthambore, that whenever they visited, he'd want to go up and spend some time in. I did it as well. We had a short break between safaris, so I went and ran up this big, tall step thing into the up this mountain where they have this special temple to the three-eyed Ganesh, the elephant god, and they sell flowers and things you can kind of put there. So he's someone who didn't really talk about faith much, but then at times would still want to go to this temple. I think that makes sense for a lot of us. There are a lot of people we probably know who identify as Christian, but don't really practice it that much, don't really make it an active part of their life. They don't belong to a church. They don't read the Bible. But at times they feel like they should go to a funeral. They go to a church. Or as I think Bobby was talking about in her faith story at session, being a creaster at one point. Anybody know what a creaster is? Yep. My previous church, we were talking about the creasters, and we had a newer staff member who had never heard that before. They thought we were talking about a family, the creasters. No. Christmas and Easter. You have people who we only see at Christmas and Easter, right? Yep. If you ask them, they would identify as Christian. But it's not a way of life for them. And that's where people kind of get into arguments sometimes. Are you really this thing if you aren't living this, if you aren't practicing this? I've mentioned before, one of my favorite quotes that kind of confused me as a younger person, but now is more profound than I think, is a Christian is someone who turns out to be one. Just let it sit. So, there's a lot of interesting things about Hinduism. We could talk a long time about it. It's one of the more interesting world religions out there, with the Bhagavad Gita and all the old stories and myths and legends. I have one of the books with some of the old stories designed for kids. It's just kind of really cool to read and learn about. So if you ever just have a chance, dig more into it. You have some sheets here that again are very basic understandings of Hinduism. But yeah, you can't get into all of it right now. So Islam's another major religion in India. This should be the Jama Masjid, which was constructed using red sandstone and white marble in the 17th century by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. In Arabic, the term Jama Masjid stands for Friday Mosque. Accordingly, hundreds of Muslims gather for their Friday communal prayer. So their main day of worship is Friday. You can go anytime. You have these set prayer times during the day, but Fridays in some way kind of like their Sunday. Its open courtyard can accommodate over 25,000 people. It's the second largest mosque on the Indian subcontinent. So to go there, you have to take off your shoes. Now, women had to kind of wear these special kind of longer black skirts and shawl, and you had to keep your head covered with it. You're not allowed to wear shorts there, so if men were wearing shorts like 90-some degrees, you had to put on a special kind of sash that covered your legs. So I made sure I wore like thin pants every day because you were going into these holy sites most days. The women had to put on, even if they had their own head covering, this kind of special one that covered more there. There are 3 arched gates, marble domes, 4 small minarets, and 2 giant minarets. Additionally, there are 3 entrances south, east, and north. Now, the inside of it is really not very big, because again, you're not designed to kind of go into the sanctuary for a worship service like you would think of as a church. There's no big inner part. You mostly gather in the courtyard. That's true for a lot of mosques, not all. You go to the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, there's a big inner part, but also the Hagia Sophia was a Christian church before it was Muslim. There are a few other large mosques in Istanbul that have big inner areas where people gathered inside to worship. And there's the biggest mosque in the world is in Istanbul, and the new part of it that I think can fit like 150,000 people. And again, it's mostly in that large courtyard area. Now they have these minarets, and traditionally the idea of the minaret is somebody goes up there and calls the people to prayer. Our guide always questioned that. He's like, you couldn't actually be heard from way up there. Depends. I've heard different things. Nowadays, they usually have speakers coming from the minarets at these different times, calling people to prayer. So Islam in India. Islam is the second largest religion in India, with around 14.2% of the population identifying as Muslim, making India home to the world's 3rd largest Muslim population. Islam entered India primarily through Arab invasions of in the 8th century and later through the Mughal Empire that built a lot of the ruins, including this, actually earlier. This is Qutb Minar. It's one of 3 World Heritage Monuments in Delhi. It was inspired by the Victory Tower at Ghazni. The construction of Qutb Minar was started around 1192. There's this really tall minaret, there's a little mosque there, but it goes to show like in the 12th century, they're building some really tall, fascinating things. And they have this iron pillar there that never rusts or anything. And they haven't quite figured out the exact composition of the metal and everything, but it's been there for hundreds of years out in the elements, nothing covering it, doesn't rust or anything. So sometimes the ancient practices go better than what we got today. I have things that rust really easily. It's like if they can get this in the 12th century, why can't I have a hammer that doesn't rust? These are the questions that plague our existence. So you have a lot of the Mughal era kind of dynasty stuff in India because they're the predominant empire for a really long time until the Brits come in. And the Brits did their thing, what they tend to do, and then eventually they ruined things as they tend to do. Partitioning, and you got Pakistan and India, and there's still all kinds of violence and hatred there. Like I had to go to India before you go to Pakistan. We're going to Pakistan next fall, because once you get a Pakistan passport stamp, they're not going to let you into India. That's how much they don't like each other. And that's a whole big history. I know you've done some book studies on that as well. So you have a sheet a couple pages back from the University of Arizona on quick facts about Islam. So the country with the largest population is Indonesia, then Pakistan, then India. Again, Pakistan and India used to be together. Britain partitioned them. Most of the Muslims went to Pakistan. Most of the Hindus from Pakistan went over to India. So now you got a situation of Hindu nationalism happening in India. Not unlike Christian nationalism here, where India is supposed to be this kind of Hindu nation, where it used to be more open to different religions, now much more prioritizing Hindus. There's been more kind of strife between especially Muslims and Hindus. A new Hindu temple was recently built and kind of opened on the ruins of a Muslim temple, Muslim mosque, though that of course upset the Muslims. It was kind of a, thumb in your eye kind of thing. Hey, look, we can do this, there's nothing you can do about it. So that's been a growing problem. I don't think I gave you the article on that in here. I think you had enough read. There's an article I found also about kind of the rise of Hindu nationalism and how it is kind of affecting things in India for these other faiths, mostly for Islam, but also for Jains and Sikhs and everything else, where there's a priority given to Hindus there. So that's a little bit about Islam. There's some facts about Islam, the 5 pillars, all of that kind of stuff. Other thing that's always interesting, if you meet somebody whose name is like Haji something, Hajj, whatever, it means they've done that 5th pillar of taking a Hajj, a pilgrimage to Mecca. Once you've taken that pilgrimage, you get to add like Hajj to your name. So if you ever meet somebody who has that on their name, they've taken that pilgrimage to Mecca. So next up is some of the ones you haven't heard of as much, is like Sikhism. So this is the Gurdwara Bangla Sahib. It's known for its association with the 8th Sikh Guru, Guru Har Krishan, as well as the holy pond inside its complex known as the Sarovar. So you kind of see the pond a little bit there in the picture. There's kind of 2 pretty big Gurdwaras in kind of the old Delhi area. We got to see both of them. So this is one of those ones I mentioned that serves like 30,000 free meals a day. And hopefully the pictures will show up of like the kitchens and things I put in here. Also in March 2021, this Gurdwara inaugurated the cheapest diagnostic center with the aim to provide health care for the poor. The patients can get an MRI scan at 50 rupees. So that's like 50 cents. So again, Sikhs do a lot of kind of good for the community, kind of like how Christ Lutheran has the health clinic in their church, and we support them. They have the diagnostic center there because it's so expensive sometimes to get it. In 1984, during the anti-Sikh riots, some 150 Sikhs took sanctuary inside the Gurdwara. An angry mob carrying cans of gasoline attempted to storm into the temple, but were driven back. None of these pictures work. Come on. You know what? We'll just try it a different way. Here's one. So that's like one of the giant cooking vats of like just like a dal kind of curry. And you can see there's several of those around. They make a lot of it. That's not one of them. Here's the extradum we missed. You can see the elephant down there, and that's the big Hindu temple and the water around it. And this is the Jama Masjid that we missed. See, they're on my computer. They get dropped in. They exist. But as you see, there's a little inner area in the middle here you can go into, and this is like a little courtyard, but that's all there really is. You're mostly meeting out here in this courtyard area. Here's another picture of the kitchens. You can see how many of these giant vats they have. Then these are kind of flat tops to cook the bread on. Oh, see, now that one shows up there. So yeah, they would make 30,000 free meals a day there. So some quick facts about Sikhism. Originated in the Punjab region, which is kind of part India, part Pakistan at this point, around 500 years ago. Sikhs believe in one God known as Waheguru, which means wondrous enlightener or wonderful teacher. So Guru is a teacher. The Sikh scripture is the Guru Granth Sahib, which is considered a living guru. It has its own room. It stays in at night inside the Gurdwara, and people can go and kind of see it. It comes out. It is considered like the living embodiment of a guru. So different faiths have different understandings of the Holy Scripture. So for Christianity, the Bible is a unique and authoritative witness written by humans, inspired by God. It is not infallible, it's not inerrant, it's not word for word what God said. It is a tool to help us understand God. The primary revelation of God is Jesus Christ. That's the living embodiment of God. In Islam, the Quran, or the dictated words of God, Muhammad was just the messenger who wrote down the exact words of God. So it is the infallible and inerrant Word of God. Then you have a level higher than that. This book is like a living guru. When the old gurus aren't there, this is kind of the wonderful teacher, the embodiment of God in the world is the book. So you have different kind of levels of what Holy Scripture means. So Sikhs worship in Gurdwaras, where they gather in a congregation called the same God to pray and reflect on their beliefs. So I'd go in and sit there, you take off your shoes, you have to cover your head. Usually orange is their holy color. I hate orange, but I wore it. So you have a little bandana you tie around your head. You sit there, and what they do is the kind of guru there reads from this book, and they kind of chant these different sayings over and over again. And you're kind of listening to it. Some of the articles of faith. So there's a couple key things that all Sikhs have to do. They're required to carry the following articles of faith at all times. Cash is unshorn hair covered by a turban. So when you see someone wearing a turban, often we think they're either Hindu or Muslim. It's neither, it's Sikhs. That's been the cause of a lot of violence against Sikhs, especially during the rise of Islamophobia earlier this century. A lot of Sikhs were targeted and killed and beat up because they thought they were Muslims. Not at all. But people just kind of assume you're wearing a turban, must be from the Middle East, must be a Muslim, therefore let us be mean to you. That's happened many times. But you have to have unshorn, uncut hair. You have to have a kara, which is a steel bracelet, kanga, a small wooden comb for your hair, a kashera is sort of kind of undershorts, and a kirpan is kind of a small iron dagger. So you carry those with you at all times, which makes traveling to the airport rather difficult. There's some special dispensations for that, I guess. But when we were in the temple, you could see people with their iron bracelet, with their dagger, at all times. So beliefs, they believe in reincarnation, karma, and the equality of women. They also believe in truthful living, service to humanity, and devotion to God. There are about 27 million Sikhs worldwide, with about 83% of Sikhs living in India. For a while, the Sikhs were known as kind of fierce warriors. They had special kind of Sikh regiments in the Indian army where they would wear their kind of turbans. You probably see pictures or movies about that in the past. So the name of God is truth in Sikhism, Sat Nam. So you have this little Sikh guide. It has a lot of interesting things about Sikhism there. The Sikhs I've known, and what I learned about India is some of the most kind of generous, nice people, really just living out their faith. For them, Sikhism definitely isn't I can identify as Sikh, but not really go to church or not do these things. No, you're either all in or you're not. There are people who identify as Hindu, don't do much. Then people who identify as Jews, don't do much. People who identify as Christian, don't do much. If you're a Sikh, you're all in. You're doing carrying these 5 articles of faith, and you are living that faith by your service to others, which is why these gurdwaras host these meals, have these clinics, raising money for disasters around the world. They are constantly kind of living out this belief of doing good towards your fellow neighbor. That is kind of the hallmark, the foundation of who they are, and so there's no halfway. It's you're all in or you're not. And it's not something you can say about a lot of other religions, for sure. So Jainism, let me find the Jain temple here in my list. Anybody ever heard of Jainism? You people? Let's find Jain temple. Here it is. So this is the main Jain temple in Old Delhi. It's right across from the Red Fort. All called red because they use this kind of red sandstone for a lot of the building. Showed up again for a second, then you get to present it, doesn't it? So it's the oldest and best known Jain temple in Delhi, India. It's directly across the Red Fort in the historical Chandni Chowk area. Oh, the other interesting thing about the Sikhs I forgot to mention in here is not only do you take off your shoes there, you take off your socks. So I'm not a big barefoot person. I believe in socks and shoes. So that was one of those like kind of step out of your comfort zone moments. Then you're walking down these areas a little bit, which can be a little dirty. And then you walk through this little kind of like pond of water. Then they have like a wet mat area. But then it's like marble. So if you're not steadying your feet, you have wet feet. And then it's slick marble. So I had to make sure like I was holding on to my mom the whole time as we're walking. And you're kind of going through there. So they have all this free food, all these kitchen areas, no shoes on. So again, a little discomfort there. Jain temple, the same thing. Now a lot of Jains practice nudity all the time. Luckily, they don't require you to do that to go and visit. But part of the reason they practice kind of nude living is this idea of no attachments. And they take, as with all religions, you have people who take it to the extreme of I don't have any attachments, including my clothes. It's one even reason like Gandhi was just usually wearing that small kind of white kind of undergarment thing. Because again, not having these attachments at all. So this temple, a Jain temple, was constructed during the reign of the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. Manastamba column stands in front of the temple that you saw. The main devotional area of the temple features 3 red sandstone spires. So the Manastamba column is something that's in front of most Jain places of worship. It has different layers that symbolize these different things in Jainism. This temple is also known for an avian veterinary hospital called the Jain Birds Hospital. So again, a lot of these holy temple places have some kind of extra thing added on to them. So quick facts about Jainism. It's one of the world's oldest religions, originating in India at least 2,500 years ago. The spiritual goal of Jainism is to become liberated from the endless cycle of rebirth and achieve an all-knowing state called moksha. This can be attained by living a non-violent life, or ahimsa, with as little negative impact on all life forms as possible. So most Jains are vegetarians because they don't want to have, a lot of them are vegans even. But then even like eating plants can be bad for life forms. You try to eat that many. I mean, it's a hard thing. I don't know what they can eat. The traditions of Jainism are largely cared for by a succession of 24 Tirthankaras, or teachers, most notably Vardhaman Mahaviriya. I don't know how to pronounce that. The last of the Tirthankaras, and a likely contemporary of Gautama Buddha. So a lot of these religions have this idea of there's rebirth. You got to get out of the cycle of suffering in this life to attain this perfect state, whether it's moksha or nirvana. A lot of it is trying to leave the cycle of this world. That is a theme in religions of most of the ancient religions. Even like Mithraism or Manichaeism, the idea that the material world is bad, we have to escape it. And that permeates, bleeds into Christianity. A lot of the times you even hear Paul talk about, the flesh is bad. We talk with them, the world is not our home. The world is bad. We got to get out of it. Go to our home. All of this is kind of this, it's in the air, the ethos, even before Judaism, of world bad, someplace else good. And it kind of permeates in. You don't see it that much in Christianity as much, but it's there. And then it's often in people's beliefs about it too. Even the idea of karma. I mean, people aren't Hindu, but a lot of Christians believe in karma, even though they don't mean to. They think, oh, well, cast your blessings, they'll come back. That's nowhere in the Bible, really, but it's that idea of karma. We get kind of scared of, well, people get what's coming to them. We kind of think that way. It's because it's been part of human society for millennia, the idea of karma. You do good, good things happen. You do bad, bad things happen. We often see that not living out because cheaters often win, and the good people often suffer in life. Which then comes the idea of the reincarnation in Hinduism and these other religions, that if you do good and you may have some bad things happen to you in life, at least next life you'll come back better. And if you do really bad, well, you'll be punished because maybe you'll be a grasshopper in the next life, or a cockroach. But a lot of these things have always been around, so it kind of permeates these other religions. It gets into Greek philosophy, and Greek philosophy has a huge influence on New Testament Christianity. So a couple central tenets of Jainism. Nonviolence practiced through thoughts, words, and actions. So violence isn't only our actions. You can have violent words and hurt people. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Words can hurt me a lot worse sometimes. And violent thoughts. That for them, even just thinking, I'd really like to strangle that person, and you're imagining doing it and their eyes popping out, just as bad. Some philosophies are, as long as you don't do it, you're fine. Others are even thinking it's bad. You get a taste of this in Christianity, where Jesus is like, you call somebody, a fool, you've murdered them in your heart, and it's just as bad. It's not just enough to commit adultery. If you lust after someone, your thoughts, it's just as bad. So you still have this in the teaching of Jesus. It's thoughts, words, and actions, not just actions that are wrong. So there are 5 main vows: nonviolence, truth, not stealing, chastity, and non-possessiveness. So again, you don't want to have a bunch of stuff. And that's where some take it as far as, I don't need clothes, because that's stuff. They do believe in reincarnation, like Hinduism, strict vegetarians. Some even avoid root vegetables to minimize harm to plants and things like that. So no sweet potatoes at Thanksgiving. Then you have the teachers who attain enlightenment, and then focus on self-effort. Jainism emphasizes personal responsibility to achieve spiritual liberation. It's up to you. So it's very different from Christianity, and the kind of extreme Christianity is it's all Jesus and God's grace, nothing you do. You can be a real jerk, as long as you just say, Jesus, I love you, you're good to go. That's one extreme. Jainism, you got to get there yourself, people. It's not by the grace of God, it's by your hard work and effort. You have to make a strict effort to practice these 5 vows. Nonviolence, speaking the truth, not stealing, chastity, and non-possessiveness. It is completely your responsibility. Christianity kind of goes back and forth, depending on what kind of branch of follower who you're listening to. You got James, who's very big on, faith without works is dead. And you have Jesus, who's very big on, do what I tell you. He doesn't often judge on what you believe, he judges on what you do. You got Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, where both the sheep and the goats call Jesus Lord, but salvation is predicated on the simple question, how did you treat the least of these? So again, even all of Christianity is how you act, how you live. Now, with that is the grace of God allows us the strength to do that, and we know we're going to mess up constantly. So you don't have to be perfect, but you got to try. You got to make an effort. You got to follow. Christianity isn't just, a belief of God's going to forgive me. Christianity also is designed to be a way of living. It's following. Early Christianity was called just the way because it was a way of living. Christianity is an active lifestyle of following Jesus. It's not so much a belief as it is a practice of following Jesus as a discipleship. There's a big difference between being a believer and being a disciple. I did a youth Bible study years ago talking about what is a Christian. Because someone who believes in Jesus as the Son of God, Satan believed Jesus is the Son of God. Does that make Satan a Christian? Well, no. So that must not be the only criteria then, right? So you have believers and you have disciples. In a religion like Jainism, you just have adherents, people who adhere to the rules, adhere to the way of doing things. In a lot of other religions, sometimes you have believers who believe the tenets of it, but don't really follow them. Who just kind of say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but you don't believe it enough to do what he says. You probably all met people like that. And it's the same as true in Judaism and in Islam, less so in Islam, less so in Hinduism to a degree. Hinduism more so, because you have believers in the gods don't really practice. But and sometimes the most in Christianity. I think sometimes we've emphasized the idea of, this grace so far, all I have to do is believe Jesus is the Son of God, and that's all it takes to be a Christian. I think that's a disservice to what Christianity really is. And sometimes I think we can learn from these other religions of people really being all in, saying, this is my life. I define my life by not just what I believe, but what I believe life is about. It becomes my central identity, not just my Sunday identity, my Friday identity, my belief identity. It is my lifestyle. I'm all in. And I can really admire some of these faiths when they're like, okay, I'm going to wear these 5 articles all the time. I'm not going to cut my hair. I'm going to pray 5 times a day and find wherever Mecca is, and I'm going to do that. That takes commitment. And I think Christianity can learn a lot from some of these other faiths on the level of commitment to those who follow. Because often in Christianity, we don't see that as much. So it's kind of interesting. Buddhism. Let me show you this big stupa. Actually, I bet if I just do this. No, get out of that. No, it doesn't show up. Well, we try. So the stupa. There it is. This is the largest stupa in Kathmandu. There's tons of little tiny ones. This is the Buddhanath stupa. There's also one, the Swaminyaram, it's also called the Monkey Temple on this hill. So take a look. You got these different levels. You got weird, creepy eyes looking at you, and you got the prayer flags. I did bring some prayer flags back from Nepal. So the first stupa at Buddhanath was built sometime after AD 600 when the Tibetan king Songtsen Gampo converted Buddhism. So the high symbolic construction serves in essence as a 3-dimensional reminder of the Buddhist path towards enlightenment. The plinth, the flat part, represents the earth. The kumbha, the dome, is water, and the square tower on top, harmonica, is fire. The spire is air, and the umbrella at the top is the void or ether beyond space. The 13 levels of the spire represent the stages that a human being must pass through to achieve nirvana. So it used to be that they'd have like special relics of holy people inside these stupas. Not so much anymore. So Buddhism in Nepal. Indian Buddhism began to penetrate the mountain passes into Nepal, perhaps toward the 5th century, although its influence has always mainly been confined to the Kathmandu Valley in the western part of the country. With the destruction of Buddhism in India in the 13th century, Tibet became the main place of development. However, the Tantric Buddhism that resulted became increasingly corrupt and fused with Hinduism. So the predominant religion, and the two became and remain today almost indistinguishable. So you have a kind of Tantric Buddhism, which is that kind of combination of Hinduism, Buddhism at this point. You have some just pure adherence to one of the different branches of Buddhism as well. The sheet I have kind of labels out those different 2 main branches of Hinduism. So in the 1930s, the first Nepalese ordained as Theravada monks in India, but Nepal's Hindu rulers refused to allow them to return to the country and imprison those who did. It wasn't until 1950 where they kind of some more freedom to practice Buddhism in Nepal. There's some pictures. All right, so let me show. This is the most interesting thing. I don't know how much time, but I think it's the most interesting thing we learned at all. So this little girl is called the Kumari. And she lives in this little place, in Darbar Square in Kathmandu. So the Kumari, they are revered as a living goddess. The Kumari are young girls who have a Hindu deity living within them. There are more than one Kumari in Nepal, but the main Kumari lives in Kathmandu in this little temple house place. The Kumari or Kumari Devi comes from the Hindu faith. However, most of the traditional Kumari in Kathmandu are Newari people. They're the original settlers of the Kathmandu Valley, have some different facial features, kind of like the indigenous people. In Nepal, the Kumari is a prepubescent girl selected by a council from the Newari people that act as a manifestation of divine female energy. So Nepali Kumari is believed to be the living incarnation of the goddess Taleju, also known as Durga. This continues until after menstruation, when the goddess Taleju vacates her body. Illness and loss of blood due to injury can also mean the goddess leaves the girl's body. So once the current Kumari is no longer eligible to be a vessel for the goddess, a national or regional search begins to find an appropriate successor. There are many criteria that a council of Newari have to make sure are met. This includes the 32 perfections of a goddess, some of which are a body like a banyan tree, thighs like a deer, eyelashes like a cow, 20 unbroken teeth should be present, and hair and eyes should be very black. During the Karati or Black Night ritual, 108 buffaloes and goats are sacrificed. The young girl is taken into the Taleju temple's courtyard, where several heads of the animals are illuminated by candles and masked men dance about. The child must show no fear during any of this. Just like a 3-year-old, maybe, or 4-year-old, had all these heads of animals dancing around. Finally, the girl must spend a night with the slaughtered heads of animals and again show no fear. If she passes these tests, the girl is taken for ritual cleansing of her past life, adorned with the Kumari clothes and taken to her new house, where she shall remain without seeing her past family until such a time as the goddess leaves her body. So she lives in that little kind of temple area, and people will go, and only adherents are allowed. So like, I'm not allowed to go into that place, but adherents of religion can go. They kind of leave blessings at her feet, pray to her. Every once in a while, she'll come to the window and wave to people. Otherwise, she stays in that house except for a couple festivals a year, where she's put on this sled thing and paraded through Durbar Square and then back into the house. I did leave you in your packets an article about kind of what life is like as a Kumari and what life is like after you're a Kumari. They are allowed to have a normal life when they're like 12 or 13, but I can imagine it'd be hard to go from manifestation of deity to little Sally who lives down the corner. And then getting married is like, you used to be God. It's awkward. So some of them kind of share some of those traumas, but it goes to show you that I think people want a manifestation of the divine. Whether that becomes the Living Guru book of the Sikhs, whether it becomes a little girl, whether it becomes whatever, or a place. Like, I think in Christianity, the closest thing sometimes we get is we want a place where we can say something happened. So we have these temples in Israel, like this is where Jesus was dead and buried. There's a couple of them, because we don't know, but people want that place. Here's the spot in Bethlehem where he was born and lay. We put a big church over. Was that really the place? No. But we want a place. We want that physical thing we can touch and see. This is where Jesus was born. This is where Jesus died. This is where Jesus was laid. We want that physical connection to God. Every religion, some way for the most part, has some kind of physical manifestation of something with the divine that you can feel connected and close to. Because it's hard to only have this thing out there. So different religions do it different ways. For this kind of branch of Hinduism in Nepal, it's through this Kumari, this young girl. So quick facts about Buddhism. Originated in India around 2,500 years ago, based on the teaching of Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha or the Awakened One, and the big fat guy, but he was actually skinny because he didn't eat much, he was vegetarian, but The four noble truths of Buddhism are suffering as a characteristic of existence. If you live, you're going to suffer. So, quit complaining and work hard. 2, the cause of suffering is craving and attachment. So, kind of like the Jedi Order, when you attach to things, that becomes the fear of losing it. Or like the new Benson Boone song, Beautiful Things. Anybody hear that song? You have the attachment to something, you're worried about losing it. If you have something you really love, the fear of losing it can sometimes overpower the actual joy of having it. So, deep stuff. So, craving and attachment is the cause of suffering. If you really want ice cream and you can't have ice cream, you feel suffering. If you're a kid and you really want that toy for Christmas and you don't get it, you suffer. Those are the simplest examples. The ceasing of suffering is called nirvana. So you reach nirvana when there's no more suffering. The path to nirvana is made of 8 steps. It's called the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path to nirvana is to be right in all these areas. Concentration, views, speech, resolve, action, livelihood, effort, and mindfulness. Buddhists believe in reincarnation, that one must stop the cycle of rebirth and suffering. The selfish individual must attain nirvana, which is the highest point and the end of the self. Karma is the belief that good deeds behavior will be visited back on individuals as well as bad deeds behavior. This is the basis for living a good and moral life. The Pali Tipitaka is the earliest collection of sacred Buddhist writings, used mostly in the Theravada school. Translated, it means the 3 baskets. So, again, then on pictures of these prayer wheels. Let me find the prayer wheels. I crossed this bridge. Hey, where is this bridge? And I hated it. I did not like heights. But, sometimes you have to overcome fear. So these are the prayer wheels. You'll see at all the kind of stupas and just around these little shrines. You kind of walk past and you spin them. So a prayer wheel is a cylindrical wheel for Buddhist recitation. The wheel is installed on a spindle made, metal, wood, stone, whatever. Prayer wheels are common in Tibet and Nepal. Traditionally, a mantra is written in Ranjana script or Tibetan script on the outside of the wheel. The mantra Om Mani Padme Hum is most commonly used, but other mantras can also be used. Now that mantra has a meaning. It's basically the summation of all that's important in life. The translation is kind of, everybody differs on the translation. But the idea is even just saying it, using these different syllables and consonants, kind of censors you. Prayer wheels sometimes depict dakanis and the 8 auspicious symbols. At the core of the cylinder, as the axle of the wheel, is a light tree made of wood or metal with the mantras written around it. According to Tibetan Buddhist tradition, spinning the wheel will have much the same meritorious effect as orally reciting prayers. If you don't like saying prayers out loud, just run by and spin your wheel. And just to say, the idea that those kind of words spin up, reach to heaven. It's kind of a practice. I bought like a little ornate wheel I have in my office now. You can kind of spin. These are some photos of kind of the Durbar Square area that you can't really see because they don't show up. But in these kind of main square areas, you have these different temples and shrines, these different gods, different manifestations of gods, Buddhist, Hindu, all kind of wrapped in together. A lot of them were destroyed in Kathmandu during the earthquakes at different key times. They've been rebuilding. Oh, so it's time for church. So, that's a lot of faith in a short amount of time. Look at your packets for more interesting information on them. I think the main takeaway a lot of times, like going to the Sikh Gurdwaras and seeing how they feed people. And it's not just about feeding the hungry, it's about feeding their community. It's about being together. It's what inspired our session to say, hey, in January, we're going to make Terrific Tuesday meals free. We're going to start it kind of small, just for the church. Not advertise it too far out, so we don't just overwhelm ourselves. But instead of having to worry about bringing $5 and all that, we're just going to have a meal together. Some people it's going to really help. Some people probably doesn't make a difference. People can donate online if they want, but we're not going to put a basket out so it's kind of pressuring. It's just a way to have a meal together and give back to the community. Hopefully we'll kind of slowly enlarge that. And then also I think just the differences in all the faiths. There's such key differences to them all. But there's also some really standard stuff in there of equality, of trying to be good to each other, to live well with each other, to practice justice, to care for one another. Even kind of the equality of beliefs. Those are, and love, those are present in most of these things. That our actions really do matter. That's present in all these things. And again, this idea that in a lot of these faiths, you're either all in or you're not in at all. And I think Christianity can do better to practice that. That if you are a follower of Jesus, you are a follower of Jesus. You're not I believe in Jesus. That's not what it is. It's like I always say, people say, well, I'm a Christian, I just kind of worship at home. No, you don't. You cannot be a Christian on your own. It doesn't work. It's incompatible. Because Jesus said, be together, worship together, do these things together. If you say you believe, but you don't do anything they actually say to do, are you actually believing and trusting in that person?
There's James.
No. Jesus says, believe in me, trust in me, do what I say. I think too often Christianity has kind of devolved into this, well, as long as you believe a couple right things, you're good to go. And that's not at all what Jesus said. It's a distortion of what Paul said. That's not at all what James said either. I think like any of these other ones, it is a lifestyle. It is a way of life, not just something you believe with your mind. It's something you do with every aspect of your being. And I think you can see that sometimes with this faith and kind of give you, yeah, they can do it. We can do it too. It's hard, but we can do hard things, and usually the hard things are the most worthwhile things in life. Any questions, comments? Tomorrow at prime timers at noon in here, I'll do a little thing on like lessons learned in India, from the faith stuff to just the culture stuff, or just things I kind of ran into. Like, oh, that's something to be aware of. So we'll talk about that tomorrow at prime timers. I'll order some momos, which are a Nepali dish, probably some naan and other things. Any questions before worship? Yes, Jack.
Thinking about like in our society, Amish do not join the military. Is there any of these religions that they would not serve in the military? Thinking in particular Jainism might be one.
Jainism is one. Sikhs used to be a pretty fierce fighting force, so they definitely had that militaristic, but Jains would definitely not try to be in the military. They'd be pacifists, because one of the main things is nonviolence. So, the only thing they could do, kind of like, pacifist and American war history, is like, I'm going to go and be on the medical team and try to help as many people as I can. And again, like everything else, some would say, well, you're still contributing to war. Others say, in the midst of pain, you're trying to bring nonviolence and healing. It's all a matter of interpretation. People say different things in regards to Christianity in that, and every other religion, but that'd be the only area like Jains would probably serve. They wouldn't want to contribute to violence in any way. Hindus wouldn't have that same problem. I mean, again, it would be, you want to be just, so some probably wouldn't want to join if they're strict against Hinduism in the sense of, I might be sent to a war that's not just. And then how do you define just war? That's a whole different conversation throughout Christianity. But yeah, so kind of like the Jews and everything else, most people in Israel have to join the military, but if you're an Orthodox Jew, you're exempt from that. So there's some stuff like that too. But
I thought I learned many years ago that India was our world's largest democracy. And I believe they used to have a parliament system. I'm not sure if they still do or not. Anyway, we had this in our Constitution, a separation of church and state, which is a little bit being challenged now. But is there a separation of church and state in India?
in theory, yes, it's getting less and less so. I'm not an expert on Indian democracy, but they're doing a lot more. There's been some laws changed, a lot more where Hinduism is driving the national conversation, the national politics more than it used to. And again, India used to be controlled by the British, so they're still pretty new in their democracy trying to figure this out. And Britain kind of used them and then left them. as they tend to do around the world. So they're trying to pick up the pieces. And I think part of that, Hinduism becomes, okay, here's this national story we can tell about ourselves. Israel had to figure out their national story after they came back from exile in Babylon. America's still trying to figure out its national story. Who are we? That's why Thanksgiving kind of came into existence, trying to have a national myth about ourselves. Because we came all over, usually in bad circumstances. Every nation needs that kind of national story identity. I think India, because they've had different rulers, Muslim, everything else, they're trying to kind of find that. And right now they're rallying around Hinduism as a source and narrative for their identity. So there's some problems with it, but it's also understandable as you're trying to figure out who you are as a nation going forward. Charlie.
With your discussion of Buddhism, you never really talked about the story of Siddhartha Gautama, right? And his, if you will, enlightenment.